cardiology here. Work with Dr. Zhao, and we do the plumbing part generally, and Dr. Zhao does the electricity part. So I deal with heart attacks, and we treat atrial fibrillation too, and when atrial fibrillation gets too complicated, send it to Dr. Zhao and Dr. McKinney. But heart disease and diet are very closely related. You're eating a wonderfully healthy meal here, all this fruit, but for the most part, our diet in the United States is not very healthy. We eat diet that is high in refined carbohydrates. And along with that, has been a growing problem with obesity in the United States and around the world. Since the 70s, the rates of obesity have just skyrocketed. That began seemingly with the American Heart Association telling us what to eat. And to try to reduce the risk of having a heart attack, it was felt that the best way to reduce heart attack risk in the 60s and 70s was by getting on a low-fat diet. That just didn't work. Risks of obesity began to rise because people, instead of eating a typical diet that we'd always eaten, you start to reduce fats in the diet. Now, when you reduce fat in the diet, what do? You got to increase something. You have to eat something. So you increase sugar in the diet in the form of refined carbohydrates. The example of that was Snackwell cookies.
Yeah.
And those were, so no fat.
Go to rage.
Yeah, but high in sugar. So what happens? People just get bigger. So at this, so in the 70s, 80s, people getting bigger and bigger. The risk of heart disease, actually, the risk of having a heart attack is going down. But people are stopping smoking. All right, we have statin drugs which come out in the 70s. Those things are all reducing the risk for having a heart attack. But people are getting bigger. And so then in the 70s, because all the dietary recommendation to reduce fat in the diet didn't seem to work for reducing heart attacks, all these other things did. Heart attack rates did come down. So Dr. Atkins popularized low carbohydrate diet. And, for a short time, the low carbohydrate diet, high fat diet tends to work. But then, people get tired of eating all that fat. And you just can't follow that diet for the long term, and people gain weight back. And what does all this increasing risk of obesity do? Well, it causes a burgeoning epidemic of atrial fibrillation. Because atrial fibrillation is related, a lot of times, to weight. What does weight do? Weight increases blood pressure. Increased blood pressure causes increase in left atrial size. Increase in left atrial size leads to atrial fibrillation. Increasing weight causes deposition of fat around the atrium. And that fat is active. It's got nerves. And those nerves can cause also atrial fibrillation. So atrial fibrillation, burgeoning epidemic of obesity. Now another thing that happens is we get older too. And getting older, and a lot of old, people are living to be an older age. And as you get older, atrial fibrillation risks also increase. And that probably has nothing to do with obesity. But obesity does make it more difficult to treat atrial fibrillation. So, what do we do about obesity? I've practiced now for almost 30 years. Up until a few years ago, I'd stopped telling people to lose weight. Whatever I told people didn't work. Nobody ever lost any weight. So it just didn't seem that was an important part of the practice. What have we told people over the years? Well, cut back on fats. That didn't seem to work. Eat frequent small meals through the day. That didn't work. So then we can go through all the different low carbohydrate diets. Atkins, South Beach, Paleo. And those diets do tend to work for a while, but people just tend to gain weight again. So I read a book a couple of years ago, which I thought I was just looking through the New York Times books, and I was going to read a book. So there's this book, The Obesity Code by Dr. Fung. So I read it, and I really thought that his advice was great. So what Dr. Fung says is that he starts off, why are there fat doctors? That's his first line of the book. So, doctors, they're supposed to know everything about health. And, you'd be pretty good at concentrating on doing things. You got through medical school. But, no difference. Doctors are as heavy as the rest of the population. So he says, it can't be related to putting your mind to it and just doing it. All right? So what else would being obese or overweight be related to? Well, then he starts talking about the epidemic of obesity and goes into how obesity rates have risen since the 70s. If you go back farther, having somebody that was really obese was fairly unusual. You just didn't see people that were that big. So then he starts talking about how they did studies on twins. And if you have twins separated at birth, they go into different homes sometimes. And you can study them because twins have the same genes. And you find that 70% of the tendency toward obesity is inherited. 70%. But he also notes that, even though that's the case, 70% of the inheritance toward obesity has been the same way forever. And then in the past, you didn't have as many overweight and obese people. So what's the difference? So then he starts talking about, is it just calories? Because, most people now, they say a calorie in is a calorie out, right? That's how you're supposed to lose weight. You're supposed to decrease calories in the diet. He says, that's not true. They did studies and they found that if you go on a diet and you decrease your calories, your metabolic rate slows down. You just don't burn as many calories. If you gain weight or if you exercise, your metabolic rate will go up. But if you exercise, it also makes you hungrier. You tend to eat more. So, he makes the note that the metabolic rates, they're not the same. Metabolic rates, our basal metabolic rate, which you would think would just be set, is not always the same. Another point. To what extent do we have control over what we eat? He says that hormones make us eat and make us stop eating. You get full, your hormones tell you to stop. So that's another point, so we're going to get back to that later. So a calorie is not a calorie. And also talks about then the fact that if you're on a low fat diet and you eat more refined carbohydrates, That's been studied in many ways. Nurses' Health Study studied that and found that that was no more beneficial than just a standard diet Americans ate in the 70s. All right, what about exercise? We talked about that. Total energy expenditure during the day. What makes that up? Well, you got your basal rate, which can increase and decrease, and then you have exercise in addition to that. Even if you exercise regularly, you know, when you get on that treadmill and you see how many calories you burn nothing. I mean, you'd have to exercise forever to make a significant dent. So it's your basal metabolic rate that really is deciding how many calories you're burning in a day. And especially if, when you exercise, it makes you want to eat more. Exercise is important for reducing risk of heart attacks. It's important for general health, but exercise, you don't lose weight by exercise. Dr. Fung says. And there it talks about other studies. If you study people in a very careful function, you feed them less, you can see that their energy expenditure decreases. That's why when you starve people in these studies, they get real cold, because their metabolic rate is slowing. Their heat, their thermogenesis, the amount of energy the body puts into staying warm, it's cut real back. So if you're starving, you get really cold. Now, if you eat more, you tend to burn more energy. And it's really a paradox. The less you eat, the fewer calories you burn, because your metabolic rate is slower. The more calories you eat, the more calories you burn. All right? So it's got to be something else. So then he starts talking about Atkins and the low-carb diets. But you know, in different parts of the world, and he specifically looks at Okinawa, 85% of calories in their diet is unrefined carbohydrates. So all carbohydrates are not the same. They have a very low intake of refined carbohydrates, and they live to be a very old age. So, chapter 10. Here he starts talking about what is why is it that you get on a diet, you lose weight, your metabolic rate slows down, eventually you can't eat any less, and you still can't lose any more weight because your metabolic rate is slowed down. What happens then? You get frustrated with the diet, you eat a little bit more, boom, go back up right where you were. That's that cycling of weight, up and down. So he then talks about what is the base of all this, why. And it comes down to insulin, the amount of insulin in the body. The body makes insulin. You know, if you're a type 1 diabetic, you got no insulin. And those people just shriveled up. They lost weight and before insulin. So the lack of insulin can be associated with weight loss. If you have, so how do you make your body make insulin? Well, when you eat refined carbohydrates, the insulin peaks and goes up and then it comes down. But those refined carbohydrates get in and out of the bloodstream very quickly. So eat refined carbohydrates, sugar, spike the insulin level up, and it comes down. When the insulin starts coming down, you get hungry. Now, if you're eating several small meals during the day, insulin level comes up, goes down, eat another meal, goes up and comes down, so that you're always got insulin in the bloodstream. When you always have insulin in the bloodstream, the body becomes resistant to the insulin. Eating more and more carbs, more and more insulin, the body's got to make more insulin to get that sugar out of the bloodstream, because the insulin is like a key that opens a receptor in the liver, and that lets the liver take in that sugar. So the more sugar you eat, the higher your insulin level goes, and then if you're eating often, your insulin levels stay high, and then eventually your liver gets full, so it can't take anymore. So you got to make even more insulin. And that's where these insulin levels go high and stay high. And they get so that no matter how high those insulin levels are, you can't get the sugar out of the blood. And that's when you get diabetes. In the meantime, you're filling your liver full of sugar. All right. So this is a long book. It takes a while to get through it. But eventually it comes down to his recommendations. What to eat. 1, reduce added sugar. Reduce added sugar. All right? So that's, what's sugar? Desserts, right? Coffee, pastries, because reduce added sugar, that's also reduce refined grains, flour, pasta, all that. So, and then you got to read labels, because it may not have sugar in it. It may have high fructose corn syrup. It may have malt. You know, there's just so many ways the food industry is just pushing that sugar on us, because they love it. Makes things taste good. It's cheap. You know, high fructose corn syrup. The government even supports the people that make corn. You know, the corn growers. That's all supported by the government. So they're making all this corn. They got to do something with it. They're making high fructose corn syrup, and that's what you get in your Coke now. High fructose corn syrup. All right. So reduce added sugar. Read the labels. Dessert. Dessert's just sugar. So instead of having cake for dessert, you gotta have something like fruit. All right? Cheese plate, some nuts. Sugar, you gotta cut back on. Breakfast. What is breakfast generally? You know, cereal, right? What is that?
Sugar.
Sugar. The sugar, and it's very refined. That sugar, it's got a very high glycemic index. Remember when Dr. Andrews at Baptist, they had a book, it was called Sugar Busters, that talked about glycemic index of foods. Glycemic index, the higher the glycemic index, the more rapidly the sugar is absorbed, the higher your blood level of sugar gets. So cereal is about the highest you can get in glycemic index. What could you eat instead of breakfast cereal? Well, you need an egg, toast. That's carbohydrate, you know, it's got cholesterol. It's going to give me a heart attack. It's just, that is maybe not the most, you know, all dietary cholesterol. Its association with heart attacks is probably not as strong as was thought in the past. We're not sure about that. You know, the American Heart Association still says we should avoid cholesterol. Some people tend to absorb more cholesterol than others. But what's better, eating an egg for breakfast or eating that big bowl of cereal? I think eating an egg for breakfast is better, because hopefully you won't end up as heavy. All right, what else can you do for breakfast? You can skip breakfast. You don't have to eat breakfast. You can wake up, you can drink a cup of coffee, put some half and half in there. What shouldn't you add?
Sugar.
You shouldn't add sugar.
No.
None. No sugar. Can you add Splenda? Sucralose? No. Why? Remember, the insulin is the enemy, right? So what does Splenda do? When you eat Splenda, it goes to the brain. And the brain thinks it's sweet. I got to make insulin. So it makes insulin. It tells your pancreas to make insulin. Insulin goes to the body. You've got nothing to chew on, right? So it makes you hungry. And it keeps those insulin levels up. So, I tell people all the time, artificial sweeteners came out 50 years ago. Has anybody got skinnier? And when you can tell me how, you know, it doesn't make much sense. You think that people would be skinny because they have these artificial sweeteners. It just doesn't work that way. Another concern I have, and they're coming out with a lot of research on artificial sweeteners and the effects. It affects the gut flora. It affects just the sweetness of the artificial sweeteners. Because, you know, the newer ones they say are natural. You know, just the sweetness of it, though, may just make you hungrier throughout the day, make you have cravings better. Because, you know, we're just not good at being resistant to cravings. The body tells us when to eat. All right. So what else can you do? So no snacks. Dr. Fung says, just like your mama said, don't eat between meals. All right. So you can skip breakfast, have your coffee in half and half. And then break your fast instead at lunch. Beverages, no added sugar. Coffee. Dr. Jolly, is coffee bad for atrial fibrillation? What do you think?
Yes.
I think some people.
See, that's why we have decaf.
Some people. Decaf?
We have decaf. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's the case, and I'm sure it is. If you don't have problems with atrial fibrillation, coffee probably does nothing to you. It probably is good for you. Tea is good for you too. Now, it's not tea out of a bottle processed. It's tea you make in a bag. And it's tea with no added sugar, no honey, no agave. And that was for a while, that was felt to be a lower glycemic index. It's still sugar. All right. And what else? So number one was reduce added sugar. Number two, reduce consumption of refined grains. That's the wheat, the pasta. Even, he talks about how in the 50s there was concerns that, you know, the world wasn't going to have enough food, so there was this green revolution where you had new kinds of wheat that came out. Well, these new kinds of wheat had more easily absorbed molecules of starch. So, you know, that new wheat may be worse for you than the old wheat that was around for millennia. But still, avoiding refined grains. What would be okay? Beans, quinoa, how do you say that?
Quinoa.
Quinoa. That would be okay. He says to moderate protein. So, you know, you don't want to be eating steaks every meal. Now, a little bit of steak once a day, it decreases, you know, that steak sits in your stomach, takes a while to digest, it makes you full. So, not the worst thing in the world, does it? You know, but the healthiest diets don't include lots of red meat. You know, you can eat fish, right? And vegetables. You know, what are vegetables? Vegetables are carbohydrates, right? They're not a lot of protein, they're not a lot of fat. So what's in a vegetable? It's carbohydrate, and we vilify carbohydrates, right? They're bad. No, we vilify refined carbohydrates because the carbohydrates in vegetables, a lot of fiber in there, that is more slowly absorbed. It doesn't have a high glycemic index. And potatoes, both white potatoes and sweet potatoes, yams, are somewhere in between. All right, so increase, Dr. Fung also says, to avoid fake foods. What's a fake food? Protein bars. Well, Twinkies, that's just carbohydrate, right?
Sure.
But, you know, protein bars, they're supposed to be good for you, right? The protein bar, they're sold in the health food section. But, yeah, it's like a, you know, better marketed candy bar, really. A lot of sugar, there's some nuts, but it's processed. So what else do you want to try to eat as little processed food as you can? Increase the consumption of natural fats, olive oil, butter, nuts. Boy, is that crazy, huh? Because that was all the stuff that was supposed to make you fat before. But one thing it doesn't do, it doesn't raise insulin levels, so that you don't get that spiral of increased insulin levels causing you to be hungrier, causing insulin resistance, and making you heavier and leading to diabetes. All right. He also likes full-fat dairy. It says that full-fat dairy is associated with a 62% lower risk of diabetes. So not all that skim milk. Full-fat milk. Increased consumption of protective factors. Fiber. Slows the absorption. So that's where if you, instead of having fruit juice takes everything good out of an orange, say. So you get rid of all the pulp, all the white stuff on the outside of it, and all you get is the sugar in 6 oranges in a glass of orange juice. So we should stay away from fruit juice. All right. So he goes through this whole book and gets to this point. But then he's got a final chapter after this, what to eat. And his final chapter is when to eat. All right, so he says, certainly no snacking between meals. But he says that we should be doing intermittent fasting. And what that does is the longer we spend with no food in our stomachs, no sugar in our bloodstream, that means that those insulin levels are going to be lower. And that dip in insulin levels helps to reset our set point for where we want our weight to be. So we all tend to have a set point. We're kind of happy at a certain weight. If we lose weight, we tend to get hungrier. If we gain weight, our weight tends to come down. And that set point is hard to break. But by doing intermittent fasting, you can decrease your calorie consumption without necessarily lowering your metabolic rate. Now, fasting has been done in all societies, in all religions, right? When you were a kid, you fasted, right? Mm-hmm. We've gotten so soft, you know, we can't fast anymore, right? But it's still good for us. You might, so I tell the story about cavemen. All right, so what would a caveman have for breakfast? Cavemen probably didn't have anything for breakfast. You got nothing to eat, right? You got to go out and get something. So what if missing a meal made you weak? What would happen to the caveman? He's dead. So we're still cavemen inside. So if you miss a meal, you don't necessarily get weak. Now, you got to make sure you stay hydrated. And you have to make sure you don't get a headache because you're not getting enough caffeine. So Dr. Fung says that you should have coffee with a low cream or half and half for breakfast. And then for lunch, you can do it a couple of ways. If you have less than 100 calories for a meal, that's still fasting. So he likes bone broth, stock, something liquid at lunch, so that you don't get dehydrated, you don't get weak. And so you get a cup of bone broth and a cup of green tea you make. And then that's it. You have, for breakfast, coffee with half and half, lunch, bone broth and green tea. You could have a salad with no dressing. That would be similar to that, because you can eat a whole half a head of cabbages for 40 calories. that's where the cabbage soup diet might come in, right? You can have bone broth and cabbage in the same meal. But then you can have supper. What should you have for supper? Protein and a vegetable. A sensible supper. And I read the book and I said, that is just crazy. Nobody can do that. But I told my wife, you know, I was 30 pounds heavier, and I developed sleep apnea. I was wearing my mask at night, and my triglycerides were up. I was like, well, I'll give it a go. So my wife sent me off to work, gave me a cup of coffee, no sugar. Boy, you know, that doesn't taste good. So, but I got the coffee down to half and half, and then I had my little bag with my bone broth and my tea bag.
Where did you get bone broth from?
Whole Food.
Really?
Yeah, they sell it in a little packet, in a little, you know, a little carton. Bone broth. You'd otherwise know that it's stock.
Okay.
We'll talk about that in a second. And then, so the amazing thing was, because I think it's because I didn't get any sugar in my coffee in the morning, I wasn't hungry all day. I'm busy, so maybe that makes a difference. But you know, I went home and I thought that was just absolutely remarkable, because I hadn't missed a meal in probably 30 years. So I fasted 3 times a week for about 2 months and lost 30 pounds. Well, that's not going to work for everybody. After I read this book about 1.5 years ago, I started recommending it to most people in the office. If you've seen them, we probably talked about it. But most people have not lost a lot of weight. And you know, it's got to be difficult to lose weight. But I have had probably, you know, more people lose weight with this recommendation than I ever had losing weight with anything else I ever told them to do. So some people come back and tell me they have lost weight. I had a doctor friend of mine who was telling me his story. He's gotten this kind of in a different direction, but he lost 100 pounds by skipping breakfast every day and eating a big thing of cabbage slaw for lunch without the dressing, just the cabbage. And then going home and having a vegetable. He actually had become mostly vegetarian, eating a vegetable in the evening, and lost 100 pounds. So if you look at all the diets that have been seemingly beneficial and looking at the history, I think what everybody can agree on is that sugar is bad for you. So if we can cut back on refined sugar in our diet, that would be probably, I think everybody agrees that would be good. I think it's a hard thing to do. And eating more vegetables, nobody's going to argue with that. Some people, you know, there's this Dr. Gundry, who Tom Brady likes, who says that you're not supposed to eat eggplant or beans and like. I think that's kind of crazy, to tell you the truth. But some people follow that kind of diet too. So, intermittent fasting, no sugar, and you know, I keep recommending it because for me it was really, it's been very important to me, and I've been able to keep the weight off. You know, what I do doesn't mean everybody does, but boy, it's sure worth a shot. And you can't nobody will make a statement saying that sugar's good for you. So, and I think that we can all probably assume now that artificial sweeteners are bad for you too. So if you can get off of sugar and artificial sweeteners, boy, you got a bit of a head start. There's been a lot of studies that have now come out just in the last few months I've been looking at, and they've done studies of intermittent fasting versus just decreasing calories in the diet. And it seems like it really doesn't make that much difference in those studies. both of them seem to work fairly well. But I still think if you can fast, there is certainly inherent, I think, advantage to fasting. And since all religions do it, I think I'm okay to say that you should. I guess that's probably as much as I have to say tonight. Let's do questions.
Ask about stevia. Can you use that? That's a natural plant.
Yeah, natural. So,
He's gonna walk around.
who knows? Because nobody's studied
Making you
nobody's
do
done a
it.
study of stevia. But I think even though they do think that stevia does not cause as much of an increase in insulin levels, but it's still sweet. So is it making you more addicted to sweet taste? That is where I think we get in trouble in the first place from artificial sweeteners. Because again, I'm telling you what happened to me, and that doesn't make it the same for everybody. But I found that when I cut back on the sugar and the Diet Coke that I used to have at lunch, I could more easily walk away from the carrot cake. I had less craving. So I think that may make an important difference. So then you just gotta
Yes.
have bitter stuff in the diet. We said bitter is better. Yes, ma'am.
What about, I know for a while there, they were saying how it's so much better to eat brown rice and, plain oatmeal without all the sugar added, or steel cut oats.
Mhm.
Are those no good because they're carbohydrates?
Well, they have a lower, the steel cut oats have a lower glycemic index. Of all the oats, steel cut oats have the lowest glycemic index. I mean, it's the most slowly absorbed because it's the least processed, the one with the absolute lowest oat product would be just the oat itself. The oat is called a groat, the oat groat. I don't know how to cook that, but I do cook the steel cut oats, and not the quick steel cut oats. The steel cut oats in the Instant Pot. 3 cups of water, 1 cup of steel cut oats, 3 minutes, you got oats. So it's something to do with the Instant Pot.
I do the crock pot with that.
Crock
It
pot?
takes 3.5 hours.
Down
the end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Steel cut.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, and then I just do a big batch and put it in the ice box.
Does it freeze? I think I can freeze
You're
too.
right.
He paid
Usually
for
go
it
through them
though.
faster than that, though.
Not
But
$5.
that's no added sugar, low glycemic index, but you're right, it's all carbohydrate. It's all, pretty much, it's got very little protein, very little fat. So, but yeah, so remember, it's not necessarily the carbohydrate that gets you in trouble, it's the refined carbohydrate.
May I ask a question? Is any data you see compared to the 100 years ago compared now, we know that obesity is increased? Is it because the people get the food easily, or financially getting better with more richer country? Because for me, I was confused. In old China, when we poor, the only thing is rice or wheat. That is carbohydrate. We do not have fat, meat too much, but we do not have fat people. But now when the China getting richer, and that's you see the obesity, young kids in the cities everywhere. For me, when I was young, I never saw that situation. They
become westernized.
Yeah, is it because they're getting richer, they get the food more easily than before? This is the why.
But they're probably also eating more refined carbohydrate. Because that's what he references that in the book, the Okinawan. And in China, you eat a lot of rice. But it's not necessarily refined. It's not as refined as sugar. So, because of the lower glycemic index than sugar has, it doesn't cause as much obesity.
The rice is easily get quickly the sugar out.
Less, yeah,
The
but less
rice.
so than syrup.
Really?
Yeah. Lower refined carbohydrate.
Wow, rice.
And no artificial sweeteners. You know, you ate a diet that was, you grew the rice, you know, somebody cooked that food. You're not getting it out of a box. And the refined foods, the processing of the food always increases the glycemic index. And
Easy to absorb.
And you add these to absorb, add sugar to it to make it more palatable. But the pre-Western societies oftentimes have very high carbohydrate intake and still don't get fat. They don't have any sugar. I read another book which was not very well written, but the title of the book was Sugar, From Slavery to Obesity. Because it talked about the history of the cultivation of sugar. And made the correlation between ill health and sugar again. They noted that the sugar before the 1700s was, you know, only the rich could afford sugar. So the rich, the nobles, the kings, and they all their pictures, they wouldn't be smiling in their pictures because their teeth were all rotten because they got sugar. But a peasant on the street couldn't afford sugar, and he had great teeth. So the sugar has been a problem for a long time, generally in wealthy people, but now it's cheaper to eat food high in sugar and carbohydrate and refined carbohydrates than it is to eat better food. Much more expensive to go eat at Whole Food to get your stuff there and get good food versus going to McDonald's. Oh, there's the other thing about slavery, from slavery to obesity, is that sugar was so hard to cultivate that you pretty much had to grow sugar with slave labor. So it made it cheap. All the new islands they were finding, and then when they went to Brazil, all the sugar industry was based on slavery. So from slavery to obesity. And I grew up on a sugarcane farm.
Wow.
How about
I don't tell Dad.
How about this author's opinion about the fast food chains? Because for me, it's not too much carbohydrate, but it's a high calories or fat food. Is that because it looks like if you eat fat from whatever at this point, it's not the major risk for obesity?
Yeah, but what do you get at McDonald's? You get a burger and fries, right?
Yeah.
So your burger got this little slab of meat on it, but otherwise it's got these two big buns. And then you got the whole supersized me fries next to it. So that is just pure carbohydrate. When you eat the burger, if you just ate the burger and the lettuce, you'd probably be okay.
So that means Popeye is good, right?
Oh.
Because
Well,
Popeye is a
You know,
fried
Popeyes, you got your biscuit, you got your...
No. Poor boys.
You got,
Poor boys.
you got nothing but bread.
French bread.
French bread. Fresh bread?
Doctor, there's a new one.
Just gotta sew your mouth closed and quit eating.
Keto diet?
You know, one put it in the water.
Can you
drink
tell?
a full glass.
He does,
It's
really.
supposed to reduce your urges, but you must drink 8 bottles of water, or the little bottles of water a day. It's more like a water diet. Have you heard anything on that?
I think Dr. Thome would probably classify that as fake food. But I don't really know much about it, but I don't. You have a lot of people that drink a lot of water and thinking that it would make them lose weight, and that hasn't seemed to work. And you got to figure out, how's it working for you? So if
Well, the status quo, I mean, if,
so.
I did lose a couple of inches in the waist.
That's very important. That's where all the bad stuff comes from. Here, because it goes from here up around your heart into your neck. All the visceral fat is the worst place to have it. visceral fat. It gets around your heart, causes atrial fibrillation, gets into your neck, causes sleep apnea. And that's all bad for atrial fibrillation.
What do you think about vitamin supplements? You know, vitamin minerals. Should you take that along with your food that you eat?
No, 'cause hopefully if you're eating a very healthy diet, salads, beans, vegetables, there's probably very little in the way of vitamins that you actually need. All right, especially if you're taking all that sugar out of your diet, you eat vegetables, and varied vegetables, and you get the vitamins through that. The cautionary tale on vitamins was when I, 25 years ago probably, I gave a lecture on the benefits of antioxidants, vitamin E, selenium, all that stuff, right? Yeah. Well, when they did studies on vitamin E and selenium, vitamin E actually, if you took vitamin E, you actually had an increased risk for having heart attacks. So what they found was that the antioxidant vitamin E blocked the effects of more effective antioxidants the body had in itself. So, vitamins necessary? I don't really think so. I don't take vitamins. Vitamin D3, I do recommend generally that, a lot of people are low in vitamin D3, so I recommend vitamin D3, 1,000 units a day.
But is it recently report said that if you don't have a vitamin D deficiency, routinely take vitamin D and calcium is not protect your bone density or something?
Did it say bone density or did it say protect you from cancer?
I think the bone density too.
You see, we can make another mistake with vitamin D then. But there was a recent study I saw. I didn't know if it necessarily referenced the bone density, but I know it said that it doesn't protect you from heart attacks and cancer. So,
I read that too.
yeah.
How do you think about the potatoes? Because potato is easily digestible. You think it's about more carbohydrate food or it's a vegetable things?
Well, remember the Okinawans ate a lot of yams. That's a very big part of their diet.
Yeah.
So, and they had a very low risk of obesity. If you look at foods on a scale, the potatoes, white potatoes and sweet potatoes are closer to the vegetables than they are to the starches. Like breads and pastas. Breads, pasta, cereal is here. It comes down and then you get to the potatoes, white potatoes, sweet potatoes, and then vegetables.
So it's a low.
It has a relatively low glycemic index.
See?
Sweet potato. Sweet potato lower than the white potato. So, I wish I could get royalties on him, but Dr. Fung, the Obesity Code, he's got a new book out, Dr. Fung, the Diabetes Code. Because he says diabetes is a dietary disease and thinks that you can treat it with
Diet.
diet. No refined sugar.
What type of bread you said was good? I didn't, was it the wheat bread or?
Yeah,
No.
probably not. Although the lower the added sugar in the bread, the better it is. That Ezekiel bread has, I can't tell you exactly how many, but if you want to look at the breads and see what's got the lowest added sugar. But also you can, if you have a piece of toast with an egg, that's a lot different than having a biscuit, something that's really sweet. So, and the egg also slows, because it's protein, it keeps your stomach from moving that bread through as quickly. So an egg and a toast is more slowly absorbed than a toast by itself. Another recipe, soft-boiled eggs in the Instant Pot.
Oh, softball.
Yeah, 3 minutes, high pressure, then immediate release. So if you put your Instant Pot, you just make good soft-boiled eggs. They're wonderful.
I couldn't even
What if you're on statins though, the triglyceride, cholesterol? I read from Mayo Clinic, they said you shouldn't have more than 6 eggs a week, so
Well, 6
that's
eggs a
still,
week is
that's
fair-
like
fair
almost
number.
1 a day.
Yeah,
I mean, we
that's
don't
much
need-
different than you would
We
have.
don't need that.
Yeah, that's much different than you would have thought before. I probably want
Yeah.
more than 6 eggs a week. Sometimes you eat some, that's different though. It used to be that you couldn't eat eggs at all, right?
Right.
So that dietary cholesterol is not as big a
They don't
factor
drink
as
any coffee.
once thought. Although some people do have a tendency to absorb more cholesterol than others. There are people that are
Genetic.
high absorbers. So that does get down to genetics.
So what about butter then? Real butter, that's full of fat.
Yeah, he says,
He likes that.
he says butter is
I
okay.
want him to hear all that.
But no sugar.
I buy whipped butter because you're getting half air, not quite as big.
Probably just put a bigger dollop on there, right?
That's right.
You don't know what's in with butter.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Bourgeois.
Thanks. Good to talk, everybody.